May 3rd, 1945. A dirt road in northern Germany. An American checkpoint near the village of Schwarzenbeck. A black Mercedes pulls to a stop. Behind the wheel sits Fritz Sören, commandant of Ravensbrück concentration camp, still wearing his SS uniform. Beside him, a woman so thin her cheekbones threaten to break through her skin. She weighs less than 80 pounds. Her toenails were ripped out by Gestapo interrogators 2 years earlier. Her back still bears the scars of burning. Her name is Odette Sansom. She is a British spy. Sören steps out of the car, believing the skeleton of a woman will save his life. He has driven her here because she once claimed to be related to Winston Churchill, a lie she told to survive. Now he thinks that lie will protect him from the hangman. He is wrong. Odette walks to the American soldiers. She identifies herself, then she turns back to Sören and does something that would define the relationship between British intelligence and one particular German pistol for the next 80 years. She demands his sidearm. Sören unbuckles his holster and hands over a Walther PPK. Odette places it in her bag. She will keep this pistol for the rest of her life, in direct violation of British regulations that classified all captured weapons as government property. She will never surrender it. She will never apologise for keeping it. That pistol now sits in the Imperial War Museum, and Odette Sansom was not alone. Across British intelligence services, officers and agents who encountered the Walther PPK developed an attachment to this German weapon that bordered on obsession. They hid them from superiors, they smuggled them home in defiance of direct orders. They refused, sometimes explicitly, to hand them over. This is the story of why. The problem facing British intelligence in 1940 was simple to state and nearly impossible to solve. How do you send agents into occupied Europe with weapons that will not immediately identify them as British? One of the standard service sidearms for British forces was the Enfield No. 2 revolver. It measured approximately 10 inches in length. It weighed 28 ounces. Its cylinder created a bulging profile, visible through any civilian jacket. Loading required inserting 6 individual rounds, one at a time, into separate chambers. The trigger pull on the Mark I style variant exceeded 13 pounds, a weight that made accurate shooting beyond close range, essentially a matter of luck. For a tank commander or an infantry officer, these limitations were acceptable. For a spy operating in civilian clothes in occupied France, they were potentially fatal. The Special Operations Executive, created in July 1940 with Churchill's instruction to set Europe ablaze, needed something else entirely. SOE agents would parachute into enemy territory wearing civilian clothing. They would live among the local population. They would organize resistance networks, conduct sabotage, and gather intelligence. If stopped by German patrols, their survival depended on appearing to be exactly what their forged papers claimed. Ordinary French or Dutch or Belgian citizens going about ordinary business. An Enfield revolver made that impossible. Its size prevented concealment. Its British proof marks, stamped into the metal during manufacture, announced the nationality of its owner as clearly as a Union flag, sewn to the jacket. And if an agent was captured with a British military weapon, the legal fiction of being a civilian evaporated. They became spies. Spies were shot. SOE needed weapons that could hide beneath civilian clothing, deploy instantly if an agent was compromised, and provide no definitive evidence of British origin if the agent was killed or captured. German weapons offered all 3 advantages. And among German weapons, one stood apart for agents whose survival depended on remaining invisible. The Walther PPK was never designed for battlefield combat. It was designed for men who worked in shadows. Carl Walther GmbH introduced the pistol in 1931 as a compact variant of their 1929 PP model. The designation PPK stands for Polizei Pistol Criminal, literally Police Pistol Criminal Investigation, a reference to the criminal Polizei detectives who required weapons suitable for plainclothes work. These were not soldiers. They were investigators who needed to carry concealed firearms while conducting surveillance, making arrests, and operating undercover. The engineering reflected this purpose. At 6.1 inches overall length and 3.9 inches in height, the PPK measured nearly 4 inches shorter than the Enfield revolver. It weighed about 20 ounces unloaded, nearly 10 ounces lighter than the British service pistol. The entire weapon could disappear beneath a suit jacket. It could slip into a coat pocket. It could hide in places the Enfield could not go. But the PPK offered more than mere compactness. Its double-action trigger mechanism allowed an agent to carry the weapon with a round in the chamber and the hammer down, ready to fire instantly without manually cocking. A decocking safety lever permitted safe carry without risk of accidental discharge. A loaded chamber indicator, a small pin that protruded from the rear of the slide when a round was chambered, allowed confirmation of readiness by touch alone in darkness. The 7.6 5mm cartridge, known in Britain as the 32 ACP, fed from a 7-round magazine that could be swapped in seconds. Compare this to the Enfield's reload process, inserting 6 individual rounds one at a time, and the operational advantage becomes clear. An agent facing multiple threats could reload the PPK in 2 to 3 seconds. The same task with an Enfield took 10 to 15. The numbers tell the story of German engineering priorities. The Walther factory in Zella-Mehlis produced PPKs in substantial quantities throughout the Nazi era, with estimates commonly ranging above 100,000 units. Effective range of approximately 50 meters, more than adequate for the close quarters encounters intelligence work demanded. Magazine capacity of 7+1 compared to the Enfield's 6. Weight savings of nearly 10 ounces, the difference between a weapon that prints through clothing and one that vanishes. Barrel length of 3.3 inches compared to the Enfield's 5 inches. Overall thickness of less than 1 inch, permitting carry in a coat pocket without obvious bulge. The Wehrmacht, the SS, the Gestapo, the Kriminalpolizei, the Sicherheitsdienst, and senior Nazi Party officials all received allocations. By 1944, demand exceeded supply to the point that production was supplemented by subcontractors. This was a pistol built for exactly the work British agents needed to do. Understanding who carried the PPK in Nazi Germany explains why capturing one carried special meaning for British intelligence officers. The weapon was widely used by plainclothes Gestapo agents, the men who hunted resistance networks and interrogated captured spies. SS officers in administrative and intelligence roles carried PPKs as sidearms appropriate to their duties. Senior Nazi Party officials received them as symbols of rank rather than tools of combat. The PPK was the badge of the regime's internal security apparatus, the pistol of the men who ran the concentration camps, conducted the deportations, and executed the prisoners. A special variant existed for party leaders. The Ehrenwaffe für politische Leiter, or honor weapon for political leaders, featured distinctive brown grips bearing the Nazi eagle. Approximately 3,500 of these presentation pieces were manufactured between 1938 and 1939. Ownership required a permit and purchase at personal expense, but possession marked the bearer as a trusted insider of the regime. Hermann Göring carried a gold-plated, engraved PPK confiscated upon his arrest. That weapon sold at auction in 2012 for $40,250. Heinrich Himmler presented factory-engraved Walther pistols bearing his facsimile signature to favoured SS officers. Adolf Hitler himself received an ornate gold-plated Walther PP for his 50th birthday in April 1939. The pistol that ended Hitler's life in the Berlin bunker on April 30th, 1945, was almost certainly a Walther, though historians continue to debate whether it was a PP or the smaller PPK. Hitler possessed both models. The weapon was reportedly buried by fleeing Nazi officials and has never been recovered. The uncertainty is fitting. Even in death, the regime's leader remained associated with weapons designed for concealment rather than open combat. For British agents, capturing a PPK meant taking the weapon of the enemy's secret police. It meant disarming, symbolically, if not literally, the apparatus of terror that hunted them. The emotional significance extended beyond mere utility. SOE training prepared agents to use whatever weapons they might encounter in the field, including captured enemy arms. This was not accidental. The organization's doctrine recognized that survival behind enemy lines often depended on blending in, and nothing identified a British agent faster than British equipment. The scale of SOE operations demanded pragmatic solutions. By 1945, the organization had over 13,000 personnel, with clandestine networks stretching across occupied Europe and into Asia. Only a fraction ever parachuted in as field agents, but those who did faced the same problem. How do you carry a gun without looking British? Policy documents confirm that agents received handguns acquired abroad, a category that included American pistols, Spanish llamas, and when available, German weapons. For operations supplying Yugoslav partisans and other resistance movements, SOE deliberately provided captured German and Italian weapons because resistance fighters could acquire ammunition for these weapons from enemy sources. A partisan armed with a British weapon faced constant resupply challenges. A partisan armed with a German weapon could reload from the bodies of the soldiers he killed. The logistics of clandestine supply reinforced this preference. Airdrops into occupied territory were dangerous operations that risked exposing entire networks to German counterintelligence. Each flight required coordination, weather windows, reception committees, and secure drop zones. Using weapons chambered in German calibers reduced dependence on these vulnerable supply chains. The same logic applied to agents themselves. The PPK's 7.6 5mm ammunition was readily available all over the world, as firearms expert Geoffrey Boothroyd later observed. An agent could resupply from captured enemy stocks, from black market sources, from resistance contacts who had looted German supplies. Dependence on airdrops of British ammunition, dangerous operations that risked exposing entire networks, could be reduced or eliminated. There was another consideration: deniability. If an agent was killed in action, weapons lacking British proof marks could not definitively identify them as British operatives. This ambiguity might mean the difference between German authorities treating the death as a resistance incident versus launching a full counterintelligence investigation. It might protect the networks the agent had built. It might save lives. Many agents reportedly cached their pistols immediately upon arrival in enemy territory, judging that the risk of discovery during searches outweighed the benefit of armed defense. When they did carry weapons, concealability became paramount. The PPK, nearly 4 inches shorter than the Enfield, dramatically improved odds of surviving a casual inspection. Odette Sansom's story provides the fullest documentation of a British intelligence operative's attachment to a captured Walther PPK, and her biography reveals why that attachment ran so deep. Born Odette Marie Céline Brailly in France in 1912, she moved to England after marrying Roy Sansom in 1931. When SOE recruited her in 1942, she was a mother of 3 living in Somerset, selected because her native French and knowledge of the country made her ideal for operations in her homeland. She parachuted into occupied France in November 1942 as a courier for the Spindle network operating in the Cannes region. Her circuit commander was Captain Peter Churchill, no relation to the Prime Minister, though that coincidence would later save both their lives. In April 1943, German counterintelligence located the network. Odette and Peter Churchill were arrested by Hugo Bleicher of the Abwehr, German military intelligence. During interrogation, Odette claimed to be the network's leader, attempting to protect her comrades. She also claimed to be married to Peter Churchill, and crucially, that Peter was Winston Churchill's nephew. None of this was true. Peter Churchill was not related to the Prime Minister. Odette was not married to him. She was not the network leader. But she maintained these lies through 14 interrogation sessions and torture that included having her toenails pulled out one by one and her back branded with a red-hot iron. Her interrogators wanted names. They wanted radio codes. They wanted the locations of other agents. Odette gave them nothing. She was condemned to death and sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp in July 1944, designated as a Nacht- und Nebel prisoner, night and fog, a classification meaning she was to vanish without trace. The regime expected her to die and be forgotten. She was held in solitary confinement, fed starvation rations, and kept in a cell so dark she lost track of time entirely. The conditions were designed to break her spirit and destroy her body. For months, Odette endured isolation that would have shattered most people. She had no contact with other prisoners. She received no news from the outside world. She did not know if her daughters were alive. She did not know if the war was being won or lost. She knew only darkness, hunger, and the certainty that death was intended for her. But the Churchill lie had taken root. Camp Commandant Fritz Sören believed he held a relative of the British Prime Minister. As Soviet forces approached in the spring of 1945, Sören calculated that this prisoner might be valuable. On May 3rd, 1945, Sören personally drove Odette to American lines. He expected gratitude, he expected protection, he expected that delivering this valuable prisoner would earn him clemency. Instead, Odette identified him to the Americans as a war criminal, and then she took his pistol. The biographer Gerard Tickle recorded the moment. Odette demanded his revolver, put it into her bag, turned and walked into the nearby village. She would keep the pistol as a memento of the war. Fritz Sören was later tried for his crimes at Ravensbrück, where estimates suggest up to 90,000 prisoners died. He was hanged in 1950. Odette Sansom received the George Cross in 1946, the first living woman to receive Britain's highest civilian decoration for bravery. She kept the PPK until her death in 1995. Her family subsequently donated it to the Imperial War Museum, where it remains on display, catalogue number 30036238. The museum's description is understated. Walther PPK pistol, 7.65mm, taken by Odette Sansom from Fritz Sören, commandant of Ravensbrück concentration camp. Those words cannot capture what that small piece of German engineering represented. To Odette, it was proof of survival. It was justice extracted personally from a man responsible for tens of thousands of deaths. It was something she had earned through 2 years of captivity, torture, and defiance. And she was not surrendering it to anyone. British regulations on captured weapons were unambiguous. The Home Office position, stated in official guidelines that remain technically in force, declares that weapons issued or captured during the 1939 to 1945 war and subsequently are government property, and their retention is not permitted. The legal framework left no room for ambiguity. Army Council instructions specifically prohibited the retention of enemy weapons without explicit authorization. Soldiers were required to turn over captured arms to unit armourers or ordnance personnel. Intelligence officers operating under different chains of command faced similar requirements through their own regulations. Unlike American forces, which issued capture papers legitimizing trophy ownership, no official British mechanism existed for soldiers or agents to keep battlefield acquisitions. Field Marshal Montgomery officially discouraged trophy taking among his troops. Every captured weapon belonged, legally, to the Crown. The reasoning behind these regulations reflected legitimate concerns. Uncontrolled weapons in civilian hands pose public safety risks. Captured arms might be needed for intelligence, analysis, or operational use. Chain of custody requirements applied to evidence of war crimes. From a bureaucratic perspective, the regulations made sense. Reality diverged sharply from regulation. Firearms specialists who work with British police report receiving trophy weapons constantly. One expert noted that UK police frequently receive hand-ins from both the First and Second World Wars, mainly C96, Mauser broom-handle pistols, and Luger parabellums. Most of the guns are war trophies brought back as souvenirs and stored in attics by the forgotten soldier. The PPK's compact dimensions made it particularly easy to smuggle. A rifle required creative packing or physical modification to fit in luggage. The Luger's distinctive profile attracted attention, but a PPK could slip into a pocket, hide in a boot, vanish into the bottom of a kit bag beneath legitimate personal effects. Veterans who wanted to bring home a piece of the war they had survived found in the PPK a trophy that was as easy to conceal from customs officers as it had been from German patrols. A 2022 firearms amnesty in Hertfordshire recovered weapons, including a pistol described by police as taken from a German prisoner as a trophy in the closing stages of World War II. The veteran who captured it had kept it hidden for over 70 years. His family discovered it only after his death. Stories like this repeat across Britain whenever amnesties are declared. Parliamentary debates in 1996 acknowledged the awkward reality. Weapons acquired before January 1946 could be held with a certificate and heirs could inherit them. Police were permitted to require that weapons be kept dismantled, a tacit admission that confiscating all wartime trophies was impractical and perhaps undesirable. The numbers suggest the scale of quiet disobedience. Estimates of war trophy firearms in British civilian hands range from hundreds of thousands to over 1 million weapons. Many are inoperable, corroded by decades in attics and garden sheds. Many were surrendered in amnesties over the years, but many remain hidden, passed from father to son, with whispered instructions about keeping grandfather's secrets. Among intelligence veterans, the attachment to captured weapons ran deeper than mere souvenir collecting. These were tools that had kept them alive. Surrendering them to government bureaucracy felt like betraying a debt owed to their own survival. If you are finding this documentary interesting, consider subscribing. It takes just a moment and helps the channel continue producing content like this. Now, let us see how this intelligence community preference became global culture. The man who would transform the Walther PPK from a niche intelligence community preference into global cultural icon understood this world intimately. Ian Fleming served throughout the war as Lieutenant Commander in the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve, assigned to Room 39 in the Admiralty as personal assistant to Director of Naval Intelligence, Admiral John Godfrey. This was not a desk job in any conventional sense. Fleming served as liaison between MI5, MI6, SOE, and Bletchley Park, the nerve centres of British intelligence operations. He knew what weapons agents carried. He knew why they chose them. He knew the men and women who went behind enemy lines and the ones who never came back. Fleming's wartime experience immersed him in the practical details of clandestine operations. He attended briefings where agents discussed equipment failures and successes. He reviewed after-action reports describing encounters with German security forces. He understood the difference between weapons that looked impressive and weapons that kept operatives alive. His brother, Peter Fleming, operated directly with SOE, training Chinese guerrillas in irregular warfare behind Japanese lines. The two brothers discussed their respective experiences throughout the war, giving Ian insight into field operations that his Admiralty desk could not provide directly. Ian himself created 30 Assault Unit, an intelligence commando force that seized enemy documents, equipment, and personnel during the advance through Europe. The unit, originally designated 30 Commando, specialized in capturing intelligence materials before they could be destroyed. Its members encountered enemy weapons constantly and knew their characteristics intimately. They brought back samples for analysis and sometimes kept personal souvenirs despite regulations. Fleming carried a .25 caliber Beretta during his wartime service. When he created James Bond and began writing Casino Royale in Jamaica in 1952, he armed his fictional spy with the same weapon. It was a choice drawn from personal experience. That choice would change because of a letter from Glasgow. In May 1956, a firearms enthusiast named Geoffrey Boothroyd wrote to Ian Fleming with professional criticism. Boothroyd was a small arms expert who found Bond's Beretta 25 inadequate for the character. He wrote that the weapon was really a lady's gun, and not a very nice lady at that, and warned that Bond was not going to last very long using it. Fleming responded on May 31st, 1956, with enthusiasm rather than defensiveness. Boothroyd had entirely convinced him, Fleming wrote, and he wanted recommendations for a replacement. Boothroyd initially suggested a revolver, but Fleming preferred semi-automatics. The correspondence continued. Boothroyd eventually recommended the Walther PPK 7.65mm, a weapon he knew from its widespread adoption by Cold War intelligence services. MI5 used it, MI6 used it. The West German BND, the French SD, ECE, and the Israeli Mossad all employed PPKs in various roles. Boothroyd was not inventing an association between spies and this pistol. He was documenting one that already existed. Fleming wrote the Beretta out of the Bond novels dramatically. In From Russia with Love, published in 1957, the silencer catches on Bond's holster during a fight with the villain Rosa Klebb. She stabs him with a poisoned blade concealed in her shoe. Bond collapses. The novel ends with his fate uncertain. In Dr. No, published in 1958, Bond has survived but faces consequences for the equipment failure. M summons him to headquarters and introduces a new character, the headquarters armourer, a major named Boothroyd. The scene unfolds as a formal reprimand. Bond's Beretta is taken away. In its place, Major Boothroyd issues a Walther PPK 7.65mm with a delivery system built into the lining of Bond's jacket. Fleming inscribed a first edition to his correspondent. The dedication read, "To Geoffrey Boothroyd, alias the Armourer," from Ian Fleming. A fan letter had reshaped one of fiction's most famous characters. The real Geoffrey Boothroyd held no military rank. He was a civilian expert whose knowledge came from study rather than combat. His transformation into Major Boothroyd, and eventually into the character Q, who would appear in the films, represents one of popular culture's most beloved figures emerging from unsolicited correspondence. The PPK Boothroyd, loaned Fleming for reference during writing, is now, according to reports, in the safekeeping of the Royal Armouries. The 1962 film Dr. No brought the PPK to audiences who would never read Fleming's novels. The scene adapting Bond's rearmament became iconic. Bernard Lee as M handing Sean Connery as Bond the new weapon with clinical authority. Even this first film has a footnote worth noting. M says PPK, but the actual screen used prop is widely reported to have been a Walther PP, the larger parent model. The film's production team understood the importance of getting this detail right. The PPK was not merely a prop, but a character element that defined Bond's identity as a professional intelligence operative. Its compact elegance on screen communicated everything audiences needed to know about the character who carried it. Production notes reveal a telling detail. The prop department could not immediately locate the specific PPK variant needed for filming. Bernard Lee reportedly provided his personal pistol to complete the scene. Like many British men of his generation, Lee had connections to the war years that included access to German weaponry. The pistol used to establish James Bond's signature weapon may well have been a wartime trophy. On screen, the Walther became Bond's visual signature, though the films later swapped to the Walther P99 for a run beginning in Tomorrow Never Dies in 1997, before the classic profile returned in Daniel Craig's era. Across the decades, the PPK's association with Bond remained the dominant cultural image. This was not arbitrary. The PPK looked right on screen because it had looked right in reality. The same characteristics that made it ideal for actual intelligence work, its compact size, its elegant lines, its association with concealment and covert action, translated perfectly to visual storytelling. When audiences saw Bond draw the Walther, they saw a weapon that matched the character's nature. The cultural feedback loop extended back into reality. Successive generations of intelligence professionals, some of whom grew up watching Bond films, encountered the PPK with pre-existing associations. The weapon's reputation, built initially through operational effectiveness, was reinforced through fictional glamorization, which in turn made the weapon more desirable to those who actually worked in the field. By the Cold War's end, the Walther PPK had become perhaps the most famous handgun in the world, known even to people who had never handled a firearm. Its origin as a German police weapon had been thoroughly overshadowed by its identity as the British spy's pistol. The technical reality behind the mythology deserves examination. Why did the PPK actually perform better for intelligence work than British alternatives? Consider the operational scenario. An SOE agent in occupied France has been stopped at a German checkpoint. Papers are being examined. The agent carries a concealed pistol as a last resort. If the inspection turns hostile, survival depends on deploying that weapon faster than the German soldiers can react. With an Enfield No. 2 revolver, the agent faces immediate problems. The weapon's 10-inch length makes concealment difficult. Even if hidden successfully, drawing from concealment risks snagging the prominent hammer spur on clothing. The Mark 1 star variant eliminated this through a bobbed hammer, but at the cost of single action capability. The 13-pound double action trigger pull makes accurate first shot placement challenging under stress. If the agent survives the initial engagement but faces multiple threats, reloading 6 individual rounds one by one provides ample opportunity for enemies to close distance. With a Walther PPK, the scenario changes. 6 inches of overall length means the weapon can hide in places that Enfield cannot reach. The rounded hammer spur was designed specifically to prevent snagging during draws from concealment. Double-action first-shot capability means the agent can fire immediately without manually cocking. A 7-round magazine provides additional shots before reloading becomes necessary. When reloading is required, swapping magazines takes 2 to 3 seconds rather than 10 to 15. SOE did develop specialist weapons for specific scenarios. The Welrod suppressed pistol, created at Station 9 near Welwyn, was exceptionally quiet, often cited as producing sound levels in the low 70s under ideal conditions, roughly comparable to a vacuum cleaner. It was designed for assassination and sentry elimination, missions requiring silence above all else. But its bolt-action mechanism made follow-up shots slow and deliberate. Suppressor degradation limited effective use to perhaps 10 to 15 rounds before accuracy suffered. The Welrod complemented a defensive sidearm rather than replacing it. The Browning High Power, when Canadian production made it available to British forces in late 1944, offered 13-round capacity in 9mm parabellum, exceptional firepower for any pistol of the era. But its 7.75-inch length and 32 to 35-ounce weight made concealment impractical. It was a combat pistol, superb for commandos and infantry officers, unsuitable for agents maintaining civilian cover. The PPK occupied the operational sweet spot that British armaments could not fill. Concealable, like no British weapon. Deployable faster than the Enfield. Reliable in part because it was mechanically simple, a straight blowback pistol that was easy to maintain and hard to misunderstand under stress. Accurate enough for defensive distances through a fixed barrel that maintained consistent point of aim. Intelligence officers who used these weapons understood the advantages from direct experience. Their reluctance to surrender captured PPKs reflected hard-earned appreciation for tools that had kept them alive. The legacy of British intelligence officers and the Walther PPK extends beyond the Second World War into questions about institutional memory and material culture. Weapons connect us to history in ways documents cannot. A PPK held by a museum visitor weighs the same 20 ounces that Odette Sansom felt when she took Fritz Sören's sidearm. The trigger pull, approximately 6 pounds in double action, delivers the same resistance an SOE agent experienced while training at the special schools in Scotland. The mechanical experience of operating the weapon transcends time in ways that reading about it cannot replicate. This helps explain why veterans kept their trophies despite regulations. The pistol was not merely a souvenir. It was a physical connection to experiences that could not be adequately conveyed through words. Showing a grandchild the PPK that grandfather carried through occupied France communicated something that stories alone could not. British regulations treated captured weapons as government property because they were, legally, exactly that. But property law failed to account for the psychological reality of survival in combat and covert operations. The men and women who kept their PPKs were not stealing from the Crown. They were preserving tangible evidence of what they had endured and accomplished. When firearms amnesties surface these weapons decades later, they arrive accompanied by stories. The pistol taken from a German prisoner, the sidearm carried through the liberation of Paris. The weapon that a young intelligence officer kept close through years behind enemy lines. Each PPK is an artifact of individual experience within the larger historical narrative. The Imperial War Museum's collection includes multiple Walther PPKs, with documented provenance connecting them to British intelligence operations. Odette Sansom's pistol is the most famous, but others exist in collections, public and private, each representing a moment when a British officer or agent decided that this particular German weapon would not leave their possession. That sergeant from Ohio on Omaha Beach, who appeared in our MG42 documentary, heard the sound of German engineering trying to kill him. The British intelligence officers in this story heard something else. They heard opportunity. The Walther PPK was not a weapon of terror. It was a weapon of the unseen. Designed for operatives in civilian clothes who needed to appear unarmed while remaining deadly, who worked in spaces where conventional military weapons would mark them for execution. When British agents encountered this weapon, they recognized its value immediately. Its German origin offered deniability, its compact size permitted concealment, its reliability provided confidence. Its 7.6 5mm ammunition could be sourced from captured enemy supplies. Every characteristic that made the PPK effective for Gestapo agents made it equally effective for the British agents hunting German intelligence networks and organizing resistance movements. The refusal to surrender these weapons was not merely sentimentality. It was professional judgment, expressed through defiance of regulations that failed to account for operational reality. Odette Sansom kept Fritz Sören's PPK for 50 years. She kept it through her post-war fame when the 1950 film Odette made her story known to millions. She kept it through her remarriage, first to Peter Churchill, the man she had protected with her lies, and later to Geoffrey Hallows, another SOE veteran. She kept it through awards and honours, through decades of quiet civilian life, through her death in 1995 at age 82. When she finally relinquished the weapon, it was not to a government office demanding compliance with forgotten regulations. It was to a museum that would preserve it as historical evidence. The PPK, taken from a concentration camp commandant, now teaches new generations about the costs of survival and the personal dimensions of global conflict. Geoffrey Boothroyd's letter to Ian Fleming in 1956 was not the beginning of the PPK's association with British intelligence. It was the moment when that association entered public consciousness through fiction. The real spies had been carrying these weapons for 15 years before James Bond received his HAS. The cultural mythology built by the Bond franchise reflected and amplified a reality that already existed in the classified files and personal collections of British intelligence veterans. What Boothroyd understood, and what Fleming recognised instantly, was that the PPK already carried meaning. It was not just a good pistol, it was the pistol of men and women who did secret work. The Gestapo had carried it while hunting resistance fighters. British agents had carried it while organising those same fighters. The weapon had passed from hand to hand across the lines of the war, always serving the same purpose: concealment, survival, the ability to kill without being seen as armed. Today, the Walther PPK remains in production. The design has been updated, materials improved, manufacturing techniques refined. But the essential concept remains what Carl Walther's engineers created in 1931. A compact, reliable, concealable pistol for those who must go armed without appearing armed. Modern law enforcement and intelligence agencies still employ variants of the design. The basic dimensions, the double action mechanism, the concealable profile, all continue to serve purposes that Carl Walther could not have imagined when German police requirements first drove the design. Nearly a century after its introduction, the PPK's fundamental excellence remains recognised by professionals whose lives depend on their equipment choices. British intelligence officers of the Second World War recognised this weapon's value when they encountered it in the hands of enemies. They kept it when regulations demanded surrender. They passed it to children and grandchildren as evidence of experiences that shaped their lives. And 80 years later, those weapons continue to surface. In attics and gun safes, in estates being settled and collections being catalogued, the PPKs of the Second World War still emerge to tell their stories. Each discovery adds another chapter to the weapon's history, another connection between the present and the desperate years when British agents carried these pistols through occupied Europe. Fritz Surin's pistol sits behind glass in the Imperial War Museum. Odette Sansom's name accompanies it on the display card. The weapon that a concentration camp commandant carried while overseeing the deaths of tens of thousands of prisoners now exists as testimony to his crimes and to the woman who survived his camp to take it from his hands. She refused orders to surrender it. So did countless others, whose names we will never know. They understood something that regulations could not accommodate. Some property cannot be measured in pounds and shillings. Some trophies represent debts that bureaucracy has no standing to collect. The Walther PPK was never British property. It was proof of British survival. It was evidence of a shadow war fought with enemy weapons. And those who earned that proof were not surrendering it to anyone.